pre-delay, time, and dampening. Okay guys, so here we are in Logic and we're checking out the new Waves Flow Motion FM synthesizer for the first time. Now I've just spent a few minutes and thrown together this sort of atmospheric introduction to like a D&B track, just so you can get an idea of how this synth sounds. So it's just using some presets and one chopped drum loop from Logic. So let's just play through that and I'll pop on the screen the time to skip if you're not bothered about listening to it. Cool, so there we go. Now, it's very, very pure sounding synth. Everything sounds very precise and on point, and that's definitely by design. So let's have a bit of a breakdown with how this synth works. We'll just solo the first one here. And this was that bell sound that you could hear, which was this. Or... and it's just one of the presets by default, so if you want to grab that particular sound, it is the 80s analog ding. What we're going to do though is we're going to reset flow motion and then have a little look around the interface and how everything works. So if you click on load, we've got a full reset here. That's going to completely reset flow motion. Now, first thing to note is when we look at the interface, right up in the top left-hand corner here, we've got flow and motion. Flow is our oscillator and general synth setup. Motion is most of our modulators, which makes sense. However, we always keep the main modulators available on the right hand side via the A, B, C and D, just down the side here. So we can always bring those in. So let's have a look at our first oscillator. On the left hand side where it says OS1, that's our on and off. So we can completely deactivate that oscillator, and as you can see, the others are grayed out currently because of that. Right at the top, we've got our ratio calculation. And these two dark circles, these are modulators. So think of these kind of like a jack plug. You can actually plug different areas in. So say we wanted modulator A to affect any of these areas. What we could do is actually just drag and drop it. We would plug it in there and it will have the corresponding color. This now becomes a modulation wheel like so. That's how all of the linking and parameters work within Flow Motion. Really easy to do. Very similar to the massive system where you can grab and just drop in the areas that you want to link things together. So just below that, we've got our octave, our tune and our fine tune. Really useful to have in an FM synth. And if you want, you can switch it out so it's purely just frequency, and you can choose the frequency that it's going to be modulating at. And then we've got pulse modulation or FM modulation as well, depending on what we want it to do. Right in the center, the key feature here, we've got our waveforms. We've got all of the basic waveforms, so sine, triangle, saw, square, and then we've got a noise oscillator as well. We can then feed back, so we can feed this oscillator back into itself, thus modulating itself. And then all of these little bits here around the side are feeding out into various other areas. The most important one to note is this here. This feeds into the oscilloscope in the middle. If we were to turn that right down, we get no output. And in the middle of the oscilloscope, we can change between flow and motion screens. Notice that on all of the various connections, we can modulate the connection as well. So I can introduce modulation into the connection directly into the output. So if we were to change this to an LFO, we can instantly create that pulsing sound. Base of FM synthesis would be using one oscillator to modulate our main oscillator. So if we were to turn on oscillator 2, and we don't need anything going to the output in this case, but we are going to have it go out to this oscillator. Now we've just got two sine waves, one controlling the other. If we were to change the octave, and this obviously varies greatly if we change the waveform as well. Then we can also modulate that signal. And we can modulate it with two different sources. So that's the basics of the oscillation section. If we go over to motion, within here we've got a lot of other parameters. We have a filter that we can switch on, and we've got handles here that we can also control. So it's actually quite a versatile filter. We can give it really high resonance. Or just a nice subtle roll off. We can modulate the cutoff frequency as well. We can also change the type of filter between low pass, high pass, band pass, or a notch filter. And we've got both 12 and 24 dB slopes. Just to the right hand side of this, we've also got the envelope for the filter. Note that the filter can be disabled as well. So it will be grayed out by default and does require just turning on up here before it's active in the chain. Below we've got a simple parametric EQ. Below we've got a simple band EQ with a low, low mid, and high, as well as two cutoffs with a high pass and low pass. To the right of that we have amplitude, which is the overall amplitude envelope for the synth. And the gain of that is also able to be modulated. Below we've got a range of effects with single knob control. We've got drive, distortion, crusher, which is a big crusher, phase, flange and chorus effects, all able to also be modulated. Allowing to make our relatively simple sound far more complex. We also have a nice stereo delay with alternate left and right times, as well as feedback and a mix control. And similar for reverbs, we've got a nice mix control there with pre-delay, time and dampening. Looking over to the global section, we've got unison, which is the number of overall voices represented. At the minute, it's only one, and we've already got a pretty nice stereo complex sound. However, if we bring that all the way up to 4, slightly detune those voices and give them some spread. Just next to that, we've got the polyphony of the synth, going from 1 right the way through to 32. This is also per unison of voice, so 16, for example, would be 64. We can decide whether that plays mono or legato, moving into note after note. And we've got our BPM sync, whether it's the host or internal and set manually, along with our pitch bend, portamento, tune and fine tune. Lastly, something we've been using a little bit already, if we have a look down the right hand side here, we've got our modulation controls. They can all be changed between envelope and LFO. And the envelopes can be controlled via just moving the control points in the GUI, or by adjusting the controls at the bottom. We've also got attack time and velocity, and whether or not that envelope loops and cycles round. For the LFOs, we can sync to the tempo by activating here, and it will display the sync ratio below, or the oscillation value. We can change the waveforms just like with the oscillators, except we also have a ramp and a sample and hold. We can decide whether or not to smooth these out or have them be quite harsh. We can decide if they trigger in mono, poly, or don't re-trigger at all. They can work bipolar, so they can be positive value or positive and negative value. And we can have instant trigger or fade in here. So when these instantly trigger, they trigger at their exact cycle point. Or we can have a slight fade in, making use of the slider here if we don't have that trigger enabled. If we head back to the flow screen, in the top left hand corner, we can turn on the arpeggiator or the note sequencer. And right at the bottom of flow motion, we have Snapshot Sequencer. What this does, this will allow us to take a snapshot of whichever patch we've created and then very quickly move between the different ones. So by default, patch 1 here has been selected and this patch snapshot will be saved to here. If we now move to snapshot 2, notice that it changes completely. If we were to now play through these, we're just back with a sine wave. If we were to go back to snapshot 1, we're back to our created patch. Using the trigger option, we can set this to BPM and have it trigger between the two different patches. We can use copy to copy patch 1 to patch 2, and we could slightly adjust it with maybe some extra distortion. Now we're going to bounce between those two different sounds. We can take this further and do this right up to 16 steps, changing anything we see fit along the way. Making for much more complex sounds. So that's been a brief overview of the Flow Motion GUI. I hope that was helpful for you. Thank you very much for watching the video and stay tuned for the in-depth videos coming soon.